In this episode, I'm joined by Sonali Mohapatra, who works in quantum innovation at the National Quantum Computing Centre in the UK. Sonali breaks down quantum technology and shares some of the future use cases that relate to the space industry. We talk about some of the human implications of the responsibility she feels to contribute to quantum tech development in a way that serves the greater good. In Sonali's role as quantum innovation sector lead at the center, she works to encourage quantum readiness across different sectors like space, healthcare, energy, and more. Sonali is a very creative person, and she's deeply passionate about diversity and gender issues. We talk about how she brings all of that together in her work and the importance of a multidisciplinary approach, and some of the mentoring and diversity initiatives she's been a part of. I'm your host, Rachel Jewett, and you're listening to On Orbit, the podcast that asks, what's our future in space?
Hello. Hi, Rachel. Well, thanks very much for having me on the podcast. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So for our listeners, Sonali, you wrote an awesome cover story for Via Satellite in November about quantum computing and made it really applicable for the space industry. So I wanted to have you on and talk about quantum computing and also hear more about your interests. So, just to get started, tell me about yourself and tell me about your work at the National Quantum Computing Centre in the UK.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I'm Dr. Sonali Mohapatra. By training, I did my PhD in theoretical and particle physics, and my focus was looking at black holes and quantum gravity. However, I do have an interdisciplinary research background, and that I would, because I was in a very research-oriented BSMS degree, a dual degree in India, which is where I did my undergraduate from. And these institutes are known as Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, ISER for short. So they were very research focused. Every year we had to do a specific research project with an innovative bent to it. And then we had to submit a report, and that was, and our scholarships got renewed based on those projects as well. So I think that very much instilled in me the interdisciplinarity attitude, the attitude of looking at how different things connect together, and also gave me really good opportunities to work on a lot of really world firsts. Actually, I had a chance to work on the gravitational wave detector at LIGO during the prototype stage. At that point, I was working on instrumentation and optics. And then I could then use optics in a variety of other sectors as well. I had a chance to work on using biophotonics for cancer research at a lab in ISER following that. Later on, I dabbled a little bit in AI as well as quantum computing. And then following my PhD in theoretical physics, I then jumped into the space sector, bringing my quantum knowledge into the space sector. So I started off doing a postdoctoral position funded by APSRC, and these are known as IAA fellowships, so Impact Acceleration Awards. And this is specifically bridging the gap between the early stage research and the commercialization of these research. So I was working at the University of Strathclyde with Dr. Daniel Oye, and also at the startup Craft Prospect in Glasgow. And at that point, I found out Scotland, or specifically Glasgow, basically produced more number of tiny, small satellites anywhere else in the world outside of California, which was really, really exciting. So at that point, then I was one of the first space quantum application developer roles in the world, and probably a quite not that many contemporary positions at that point. It was really exciting to be on hands building one of the first quantum instruments for CubeSats in the world. We delivered one to Canada, which should be flying in 2025, and one of the missions is going to fly through ESA in 2025 as well. And then later on, I joined industry full-time, and then at the end of my stint at Craft, I was looking at space applications as well as business development for AI, as well as early-stage quantum applications for space. And then at the National Quantum Computing Center, I now look at our innovation strategy across a portfolio And some of my sectors are space. The other one is healthcare, on which there's quite a lot of focus at this point. Healthcare and pharmaceuticals, actually. The other sectors are energy, financial services, transport, climate, and so on and so forth. So a large part of my work involves stakeholder engagement, working with various different diverse stakeholders, starting from government to regulators and policymakers, as well as industry and academia, and then helping with the discovery of use cases which lend themselves to quantum computing and the development of applications from those use cases, and then looking at various different mechanisms through which we can stimulate the development of more use case discovery and application work in those various sectors, looking very broadly at how do we make the society, or basically those businesses, quantum ready. And by that, we mean that by the time commercial level quantum computing platforms are on the horizon, we need to making various different businesses and organizations kind of at a place where they can very much they are placed very strategically to be able to get value, and not only themselves get value from those quantum computing platforms, but be able to get profit for their businesses, as well as kind of deliver value for society in general.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. So could have a lot of questions from that.
I'm taking a bit too long there.
I guess to go back, where does your interest in you're like, I want to be a theoretical physicist. Where did your interest in that develop from?
Yeah, I think I've always been one of those people who doesn't like, I always found the distinction between various different like whether you want to do science or arts, or whether you want to do theoretical physics versus something else. I have always struggled with those boundaries. So in undergraduate and in my BSMS course, for example, I was really struggling with whether I should go for neuroscience or whether I should go for theoretical physics, and I actually went for theoretical physics as my major, and I had a few neuroscience topics and cognition topics as my minor, actually. So it was a very good way of building up that interdisciplinary understanding and hands-on understanding in various different basic sciences. So actually, a lot of my interest was built on this from very, very young age. I read a lot of sci-fi. I read a lot of fantasy. It's very funny to say that all my interest in physics came from fantasy books, but there you go. But then I, started actually working in physics and realizing that the world is actually much more fantastical than you can actually even read in fantasy books. And a lot of it was to do with my mom, because, she used to be really, she's creative in the ways that she taught me, I guess, or developed the curiosity in me. So one day she would break a thermometer and just show me like, there's mercury in here, and this is what mercury looks like, and tell me the pros and cons and the toxicity of mercury, and just kind of like, show me how weirdly that material works. If you press it together, it becomes a big globule. If you poke it with something, then it becomes little globules. Other time we were looking at magnets and how it can attract various things through different substrates. And also I think, just generally, I was allowed to read a lot of books. I was allowed to ask questions, and never was told, why are you asking this particular question? I guess that's where that interest came from. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what do you see as the connection between theoretical physics and quantum technologies? Like what's the line between those two?
Quantum mechanics is obviously one of the well-established theories that describes our world at a very, very small scale. It has been proven through various experiments over the last 100 years. So that understanding has been a very fundamental part of my theoretical physics training.
Okay.
But it's been really interesting to see that being commercialized, being a part of both academia as well as industry in that sweet spot, in that translational region, so to say. Because when we were doing a master's and then going into doing a PhD in theoretical physics, it was, people always said that you're probably not going to get jobs in this particular area. So it was really good to see that quantum technologies were starting to get commercialized, and a lot of companies were starting to lead the commercialization of quantum tech. So you have various different interesting roles right now, starting from, you could be doing product design, to you could be doing marketing for quantum technologies, to there is a big requirement for a lot of PhDs and postdocs and actual technical people. And actually we have a lack of skills and talents in that field right now. So there's a lot of requirement for a lot of new physicists to be coming up in this area, because our world is changing and a lot of innovative technologies are coming together. And I also see that previously we needed a lot of hyper specializations and people with those hyper specializations looking very deeply at one particular topic. While today that is as important as it was before, we're also starting to see big, with this commercialization era of like disruptive technologies such as AI and quantum computing, the development has to happen across a stack, across various kinds of technologies at the same time, across softwares, across algorithms, across hardware, across control systems. So we're seeing various different disparate, or at least streams that looked disparate, previously. They're all coming together. So we are starting to see collaborations of engineers and scientists and product designers and project managers and marketing people more today, because we're actually building them into something that will be used by real people, rather than something that is going to stay in the lab and is going to be only used by physicists for their fundamental research.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned that's part of your role, working with stakeholders across different groups. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask the basic question first. How would you, what is quantum computing?
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I won't go into too much of the technical details into it, but essentially quantum computing is just a very different kind of computing than what we are used to. So let me start by saying that all the computers that we are all used to, our personal computers, are a form of computing that we can classify as classical computing. Now, quantum computing, instead of using bits, because we might know that classical computing uses the binary 0 or 1. And basically what that is dependent upon is having transistors, which can be in an on or off position. The on position is 1 and the off position is 0. So you have like no current or current, which determines whether it's 0 or 1. Now, with quantum computing, what we are using as its fundamental building blocks is a quantum particle. So basically what we are trying to trap and use is something like a single particle of light or a single photon. And first of all, that's really difficult. It's extremely tiny. So we need a lot of specialized equipment. We need a lot of specialized understanding. And that is why we require people with such high skills and, PhDs and multiple postdocs to be able to trap those ions and trap those photons, for example. And then we need to be making them, then we need to look at the challenge of making them work together as a computer. But the essential fact is that these are quantum particles that we're using as building blocks. So these building blocks are known as qubits instead of bits, so quantum bits, right?
Okay.
Instead of just having access to two states, 0 and 1, because these are quantum particles, we've all heard of the quantum cat, the Schrodinger's cat paradox, right? Instead of being 0 or 1, they are going to be in a superposition of states 0 and 1 at the same time, right? And this allows us to access multiple number of states rather than just two. So the number of states within, I'm just going to provide, for example, it could be 0 plus 1 by 2 or 0 minus 1 by 2, not these exact states, but the number of states we can access would be 2 to the power n, where n is the number of qubits we have to access on our side. So basically this opens up massively more power. First of all, it's just a very different way of calculating things, but this then necessitates that we start thinking of problems in a very different way. So some of the problems that we might have been thinking about in a particular way, might have been formulating in a particular way, we need to start writing it as a quantum quantum problem, as a quantum Hamiltonian, for example. And basically, quantum computers are not going to be useful in every single thing that our PC does.
Okay.
They're going to be useful in very, very specific type of problems in which they have been proven to have a big advantage over classical computers. And these are only 4 specific type of problems. If you have like simulation problems where you're trying to like simulate entire molecules, very complicated systems, which are quantum mechanical to start with. So chemistry systems, for example, would be the perfect type of systems to simulate. At the moment, we cannot, both using a classical computer or a quantum computer, we are unable to like make exact simulations of the molecules that we have. But we have started experimenting with quantum computers to start simulating those quantum systems. And ideally, in the future, we would be able to simulate them exactly because we are using a quantum system to simulate a quantum system now. The other type of problems which it would be really good to do is optimization problems, where it's a really complicated problem with thousands and thousands of variables that we need to keep in mind. So think about problems such as weather modeling. Those would be much, much, much simpler and would take much less time than what our classical computers are taking right now. Or cryptography. And this is actually one of the threats of quantum computing, that they would be so much better than cracking encryption than our current computing systems, that there is a whole stream of research now looking at what can we actually do to protect us from that particular threat and to find ways of transitioning into a future safe security system. Actually, that was part of my work that I was doing in my previous role at the company Prospect. So these are like specific types of problems, also machine learning problems. Potentially, there's some advantage looking at quantum machine learning. So these are 4 specific types of domains in which quantum computers are going to provide us advantage over classical computers. Now, we need to remember that right now, quantum computers are small. They're not commercial scale yet. We are right now not able to do big problems that we haven't been able to solve using classical computers. But that's what the Quantum Computing Center is trying to do. We are trying to take on the challenge of scaling these initial quantum computing platforms. How do they scale? How would we make them bigger? How can we make the cryogenic systems much smaller? Which are the platforms which are actually going to produce the most advantage? Because we can make quantum computers using multiple different types of modalities, multiple different types of technologies, which is going to come up as the winner. So there's lots of different factors to be thinking about. Then there's the supply chain, like do we have all the components that we require to build that, tech developers require to build a quantum computer? What are the new discoveries that you require? What are the discoveries on the algorithm side so that people can actually compute something on a quantum computer? So we have to build across the entire quantum stack. And then we have to, I guess you have to like emulate the entire kind of evolution of innovation that has happened with our classical computing systems and where we are now, right? Like right now, we don't need to understand what happens inside our computers to be able to use it. A normal person doesn't need to understand what happens inside a computer. So ideally in the future, we wouldn't need to understand quantum physics to really work with it. We need to go towards that point where everything is focused and user-oriented and user-friendly.
Yeah. Wow, that was a great overview. Thank you. So in like 20, 30 years, would the average person use a quantum computer, or the average person wouldn't have problems that would need that level of computing? What do you think?
Well, I think they might. So for example, if we are thinking about problems like the energy of how much energy does our entire home consume, for example, and can we minimize or optimize the energy consumption of our entire home? Now, that's a problem that could be useful for the consumer to optimize themselves, perhaps. We think in the next 10 years, we would have platforms which would be able to do meaningful calculations, right? So once we have those platforms, then if you've given me another 20 years, I would assume that we would be in a really good position where the common user is being able to code into quantum computers what they want and use it to their advantage. And I would hope that we can all get a bit more hands-on about solving some of the biggest problems that are plaguing our world right now.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So then you wrote this awesome overview of quantum computing for space and some of the use cases and the value of it. And for our listeners, I'm going to drop it in the show notes, so people can take a look. But can you briefly talk about, or not briefly, some of the use cases of how quantum computing could or will apply to space in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just start by saying that quantum computing is just one type of quantum technology, right? And then there are multiple other types of quantum technologies that are currently being
Okay.
some of the other types of quantum technologies are quantum sensing. So quantum sensors are being developed, multiple different kinds of quantum sensors. There's gravimeters, magnetometers. So let's talk about a quantum magnetometer, for example. A quantum magnetometer will be much more precise than normal magnetometers that we have at the moment. And there are concerns that we are kind of in a solar cycle where perhaps we might be getting more solar flares coming up. And there is a danger that if we have a particularly bad solar weather incident, then it might take down some of our power grids. And quite a lot of our economy is at the moment dependent on our power grid systems. So think about our medicines are stored using electricity. They're, preserved. Our food, a lot of food is preserved using electricity. Transport, and anything, any of the life-saving technology in the hospitals, for example. And these are some of the more critical technologies that I'm talking about, critical things that we are trying to ensure they're preserved and kept properly. So if at once we have a solar weather event and we lose the entire country's power grid, then it's going to be really, really bad for us. So this is one of the cases where a solar magnetometer or a space magnetometer, if we space qualify it and we fly it on a CubeSat, which is around the sun, or on some particular orbit, which is safe around the sun or around the Earth, then it's able to predict those solar weather flares much before they're going to happen. Much before they're going to affect us really badly, then we will be able to take some kind of preparatory measures. So that's just one example. The other example is space debris is becoming more and more of a concern. Mm-hmm. So there's many small items that we have left back in space, unfortunately, or, satellites are broken apart, or, things are broken apart. And there's a lot of debris starting from 1 centimeter to 10 centimeters to, even bigger ones. But even a debris as small as 10 centimeters traveling at a really high velocity, as things tend to do in space, will cause a massive damage to anything that it will collide into. And it is really difficult to be able to predict all the space debris that's there. To not only predict, first you have to classify the images if you're using an AI system to track and predict where those debris are, and then predict their future trajectory. So if we have thousands and thousands and thousands of those debris, then that problem becomes even more complicated. So that's potentially one of the use cases for quantum computing, to be able to look at all those trajectory of those debris. Some of the other use cases could be our traffic, data traffic demands are going through the roof. Our population is growing, and we are in an ever-connected digital world. So going forward, a lot of people are currently looking at how do we do network traffic optimization. And optimization problems are just something that is going to be one of the use cases that quantum computing is going to be have advantages over. So we could look at mission optimization, satellite network optimization, data traffic optimization. We could also look at future materials. So materials and manufacturing is one of the early adopter sectors in terms of quantum computing, because remember that if we are looking at molecules, we can, in principle, simulate entire molecules in a commercial grade quantum computer. So we could screen through thousands of potential artificial molecules and look at one which could be the best possible molecule for spacecrafts, for example, to build spacecrafts. So that's another example. And then we can, of course, look in the very, very future-centric sense. We can always think about space health, space medicine, space, looking at life signatures in space, because there's, I think, a really big database somewhere. And you would be, again, able to do those molecule signature checks using a quantum computer, for example. So the way I see space is that space is not just a sector by itself. It's like a umbrella sector which has so many different verticals under it, because you can do agricultural insights from space. You have GPS dependent on satellites. You have, a lot of healthcare dependent on satellite data as well. So it's a critical technology, and we are more than ever reliant on it. So we have to like break it down into its constituent parts, and then look at each of them separately.
Right. Yeah. That space is a domain where activity in all these different sectors can take place. So do you feel really like excited about the possibilities of quantum for space?
Yeah, I do feel really excited about the possibilities of quantum for space. So some of the early quantum technologies, such as sensing, for example, are already being deployed on CubeSats on various spacecrafts that are currently being launched. So we are going to start seeing those data come back really fast, and we are able to and they will be the first quantum technologies commercialized for the space sector. In terms of quantum computing, as I mentioned, a little bit in the future, but not that far away. And in terms of like quantum readiness, we need to start thinking about all these use cases now. We need to start looking at, how can a business basically include quantum business processes, because it's a very, very different kind of thinking. It's a complete paradigm shift. So it can't just be that we wait till when new quantum computers are on the horizon, and then we start doing all the algorithm development, because we have to do all of this work parallelly now. It will take us 10 years to understand how exactly we will work with a quantum computer, even if we have one in our business, So I'm really excited about it. However, at the same time, I think just an acknowledgement that we are facing very complicated world issues right now. Climate change is definitely one of the biggest threats we are facing together as a species, and I think quantum computing is going to have a lot to offer in that particular problem space. And space is another domain which definitely, has a lot to offer in terms of climate change research and climate change data and insights. And it's already, and we are already dependent upon space insights for our climate change strategies already. So that's where I see a lot of the new materials for carbon capture, for example, could benefit from quantum computing, for example. But I will also say this, we also have a big responsibility on ourselves to make sure that we are using the technologies that we develop in a responsible and ethical manner. And I guess there's also the world political landscape is getting a little bit more complicated right now, to put it lightly. And I guess I am a bit worried because, obviously we are scientists who are working to commercialize technologies because we do see a lot of societal benefits from these technologies. However, when we do see the same kind of technologies being also used for the harmful side of things on civilians, then it is really hard to remember why we're doing all of this. So I want to make sure that we're all kind of thinking about the responsible innovation process. We are asking the tough questions in our own job roles, and we are holding ourselves up to very high standards, so that in the future we're not again saying that this is because of us that that this technology has been used in this very severe manner in certain parts of the world.
Yeah, that was definitely something I wanted to ask you about. If there's, potential to make a really positive difference, but there's also really powerful technology can be used for ill also. So, I mean, it's great that you're wrestling with that and that the scientists that you're working with, you're all holding yourselves to a very high standard. But yeah, those are heavy questions.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that all of us are grappling with right now. And I think, it's really good to see when sometimes political leaders are able to themselves up to the standards of governing, keeping in mind welfare goals of civilians. And whether it's civilian of your country or a country on the other side of the planet, I don't think that matters anymore, because we are very much fighting against bigger issues that concern all of us as a population. And so, we should be looking at a common welfare goal, in my opinion, of all human beings. And obviously, we are very much in a globalized era. There's a lot of back and forth of technology everywhere. It's very difficult to keep things to yourself in this kind of a world as well. I do really, obviously, the academic in me really enjoys collaboration. The innovation strategist in me right now also sees collaboration as a very meaningful method of growing technologies, of really developing technologies to their full potentials and exploring various different aspects which we might not have in silos. And diversity is a very big factor to make sure that we are getting all of these innovative ideas which we might not have. However, yes, I think we are all becoming more worried about the impact of all of these technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned innovation strategy, and you mentioned the importance of diversity in there. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spent quite a long time now, I think more than like 13 years working in the EDI sector as well. So worked as a consultant for many different companies in the past. And previously, I've set up a few nonprofit organizations. So I was the chair and founder of New Voices in Space, which was a working group of Space Scotland. I was one of the executive committee members of Space Scotland, which is an umbrella organization in the Scottish space space. It was really good to get that experience. The space sector in the Scotland obviously is very thriving. Across the UK as well, it is a young space sector. However, and that is the exact reason why we have so much scope to build in diversity and inclusion kind of initiatives and make sure that we are representing the diversity of the UK within the sector as well. So that's kind of why New Voices was set up, to encourage new voices in space to come in, to interact with each other, to network. We did quite a lot of events at various different schools. We ran role model talks where we would go to different kind of schools and undergraduates, and we would give talks about various different projects that we have been working on or our experiences. We also ran various initiatives. So one of the initiatives we ran in which an officer, Wenmiao Yu, who's also the founder of Quantum Dice, another space quantum company, she was leading on this. And this was, we had a collaboration with Ambasat, and Intel sponsored this one, where we are able to take satellite kits, around 200 satellite kits, to lower economic zone schools across Scotland as well as in England. And so students are going to have hands-on experience of building a satellite kit and then launching the satellite. And then later on, they're also going to be doing some hands-on data analysis training with Intel as well, from the data that comes down from that particular satellite. So I think, initiatives like this really give people the chance to get some hands-on experience where they might not have any before. And also we ran quite a few skills and talent mapping activities. And one of the other activities that we did was we brought together a working group to work on an EDI guidance pack for the space sector, because we realized that there was a need for that EDI guidance pack. There was need, but there was also quite, the sector actually was quite enthusiastic to have that pack, which was really good to see. And we also realized that sometimes, given that the sector is kind of now moving from old space to new space, there's quite a lot of startups that come into this sector. And while we all want to be, while it is really good to be starting to think about diversity from the onset, from the beginning of your startup, many people do not have the budget. Many startups do not have the budget to be implementing certain policies and so on. So what we did was we put together a very comprehensive EDI guidance pack for all of those startups. And then we also managed to bring together EDI consultants and introduce them to the sector. And we were able to offer subsidized rates for policymaking and policy writing, and also for something like a diagnostic clinic kind of thing, where people can come in and do a bit of a diagnostic on their culture and get advice on what could be good in terms of their direction going forward, in terms of company strategy. So that's something that we did as part of New Voices. At the moment, I am a director of the Prospero Space Fellowship, which is a fellowship that I helped shape a little bit in its infancy as well. So this is led by Alden Legal in the space sector, and multiple other companies are sponsoring this as well. And so with this one, we are particularly trying to address the skills gap. And the skills gap is at the moment, we have technical talent, even though we could do it more. We have business and commercial skills talent, but there is a particular need for talent with both of those kind of backgrounds in particular kind of roles. So with that kept in mind, the first team of directors built this particular scholarship, national level fellowship, where undergraduate students can apply for this scholarship, and then they will have a assured internship at the end of this particular fellowship. During the fellowship, they are being mentored by two mentors. They would have one mentor for a technical side and one mentor from a business side. So they're matched with both of these professionals who have had experience in the industry for quite a while. And then the industry, which is sponsoring them, is then getting a return that they are having this talent who has been trained for a year, and they're able to then have them work in their company as an intern later on. So we are the next round of the Prospero Space Fellowship is just going to be opened in a few weeks, and we're looking forward to the next cohort of applications already. So that's just another example. I have been on the board of Q India as well. So that's Quantum India as part of Quantum World. I've just been writing congratulations to one of the early team members who's still Rishi Sridhar. He's a founding member of that community, and they've just had some very, very big events, and it's flowered into a really big community where people just come in and they learn from peer classes and flipped classrooms and so on. So that's again really tackling the quantum literacy side of things from a very bottom-up approach, which is another a really good approach to take, because that's community working all together to improve the awareness and the skills and talent all by themselves. And then we have to make sure that the mechanisms to then absorb them into various different roles and various different PhDs and postdocs that they're in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned a number of initiatives there that you've been a part of for encouraging diversity. So that's awesome. I wanted to ask a little bit more about the the guide that was it Craft Prospect had put together for startups, or was it the Voices?
New Voices.
New Voices. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's really smart because, a lot of, all companies are saying that they want to encourage diversity, and some startups make it part of their mission from the outset. But I've also heard that some startups, they're trying to move so fast that they just, they're just going with the talent that has the skills immediately that's there. So what was your experience with that like, and what kind of interest did you see from startups that New Voices talked to for it?
It was quite varied. We could have done with more interest from certain parts of the sector, but that's always a danger when you're doing EDI work. I think it's always a bit end of the day, even though there is a very clear business case for diversity. However, it was really interesting to see that there are certain startups now. There were some startups in particular who came by themselves to have a meeting with us and understand in the very early stage, they were just starting up. They were starting to recruit a bigger team beyond the general founders that were there in the team. And they had come to talk to us how they can build in cognitive diversity from the very early on within their team. And I think that was extremely encouraging to see, even though, I mean, it was also more encouraging to see that these were men. These were startup founders who were men who had come to talk to us. Mm-hmm. And obviously part of that is the workforce has changed. These men have partners who are also working. And so the remote work era has also kind of given everyone a bit of a sense of, we are able to make we are able to make things work for disabilities. We are able to make accommodations for caring responsibilities. We are able to make flexible working work for us when we need to, for most of the population. So those are not actual hurdles. Those were more like, which are our priorities is the main question. So I think now we have kind of come to the point where a large part of the population is, partnered together. They're all working, different genders are working shoulder to shoulder. And so there is this back and forth of feedback between what everyone is thinking, what everyone is feeling. And people are starting to understand what is attracting talent and what might not retain those talent. So it was interesting because one of those guys heard from his partner that in the company that his partner worked, they really were looking to, no, we have to have everyone in the office. And so his partner, even though really enjoyed the work at that particular place, had to leave because that was just not possible with the childcare options they had, for example. And so it shows me that emotional intelligence that now developed in a large part of the population, for example, related to the future of work. And that gives me hope. At the same time, I think we have recently seen a survey of, there's an big ideology gap growing between men and women as well. I don't know if you've seen that survey.
I did see that. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, we've all kind of seen it over the last many years. I call my parents' generation the transition generation, but I actually consider us as part of the transition generation as well, because we put a lot into like women empowerment, and all of us have unlearned, have put so much effort into our own personal development because we were told, that we also had to like earn our place in the world, because, every time we had to hear a lot about, but you're a woman, why do you need to do this? Why do you want to do this? Why do you need to do this? You had to prove yourself. Now, for the part of the population that did not have to prove themselves, or did not actually have to sit and do all these discussions or think through or go through the exact same process where we developed all those mental, models and emotional intelligence from, has had no reason to do the same, right? Yeah. So we didn't really invest a lot into the growth of our young men as much as we did into some of our women over the last 10 years, let's say. So I think that's a big problem, yes, because now communication barriers are a problem. What people expect when they go into a marriage and what they get, even though they're saying something, they know the right words to say, but it might not be the exact same thing they're expecting. I think there's deeper work for all of us to do there. And again, I think everywhere we are getting a bit more, we're forgetting that we can very easily go into bubbles, and we need to be better in setting community values and understanding how we can actually build those communication. Again, that's going to be one of the biggest challenges going forward, I think. But I'm sure we can do it. Yeah. If we survive climate change and other crazy things going on right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the study that you mentioned was showing that there's kind of been a divergence of views between young women and young men around the world. I think it addressed the UK and South Korea. I don't remember if it addressed the US also, but it was showing a shift definitely toward much more traditional views of gender roles among young men, and then much more liberal views of gender roles for young women. It was very interesting, and it makes you think, how can a generation is absorbing like two very different views, and where are they getting their messaging from? And
I mean, this was a known problem, I think. I mean, in the feminist and EDI circles, like in intersectional feminist circles, like this is a well-known problem. And I think when we saw that report, it wasn't, at least to me, it wasn't that big of a surprise, because
that's true.
Right, for a lot of us, I think the messaging that we get is very different from the messaging that young men get. For example, in books that we read since we are a kid, like you would see Albert Einstein's pictures everywhere. And so everybody knows what a scientist looks like, is stereotypically a picture of Albert Einstein. Now, Soapbox Science is an initiative which runs across the UK every year, where they take women on soapbox near beaches or in community places, and women in coats, and they start trying to like change that image of what does a scientist look like. And they have slowly started that actually seeing the change of mentality when young children around the UK now are drawing what does a scientist look like, they have started doing more drawings of women. Now, initially, there would be no women, so there are some things we can use as objective metrics to look at what the differences are, where our books have gone wrong. For example, nobody knows the name of Emmy Noether. She was one of the key scientists upon whose work Albert Einstein's work hinged upon. And she's the inventor of modern algebra, mother of modern algebra, she's called. But even when I was taught about Emmy Noether, like Noether's theorem is a very fundamental principle of theoretical physics. But I was taught Noether's theorem, Noether's theorem, Noether's theorem. I never thought to ask whether Noether is a woman or a man. My bias was that, oh, this is a man, right? Now, only when I went to Canada, I was at Perimeter Institute, I was like doing my master's, and then like very, very belatedly, I realized that this is a woman we're talking about. And I had been like taking her name for the last like 7 years, and I still don't, because like nowhere her picture has been her name. And then if you read her story, it is extremely heroic. Some of the things that she's had to go through, and most of these women, that what they have had to go through, most of the messaging are subliminal. What we read, like we know that a lot of credit wasn't given to women. So the messaging there usually is, oh, so it's okay for men to take the credit for women. It's not okay for men to make a fuss about things, for women to make a fuss about things, even though their credit has been stolen. Because, when women tend to make a fuss, then everybody starts getting really mad. Now, these are subliminal messaging that we are teaching our children. And it happens in every family. It happens in the school. It happens in a mall. It happens, between peer groups. And so we have been at fault about sending those messaging through. However, I'm sure we can change that going forward as well. It will definitely be a bit of a difficult tussle when we are trying to like align expectations from a misaligned population now.
Yeah. I'm curious about how you've been able to balance your interest in, you're in very, very technical, difficult science, and you're doing very interesting work there. You're also doing innovation strategy where you're communicating across different groups. You have a really strong interest in advocacy for DEI, bringing creativity into your work. How have you been able to kind of like show all of these different facets of your interests in your career?
Thanks. Yeah, I keep thinking about that too. I'm not sure I have any like specific answers to that, like very, very concrete, well-defined answer to that. I think I've always been, as I mentioned, I think I always see myself as a bit of a polymath, let's say. I just really like my interest in various areas. I also think in a web. I know that some people think in a web. I don't know what the technical term for that is. I really struggle with our linear mode of communication. So when I'm like speaking, you have to like choose a particular direction in which to take that sentence.
Yeah.
But I always say that, what I'm not saying is probably like much more in information than what I'm like choosing to tell you. But I'm choosing to tell you this because it's the most important thing right now. However, there's so much information that I'm not telling you right now. But yeah, so all of that has information on how all of this is linked to art, to like story of what my grandmother told me, or, how my grandfather was helping me with my studies, or, like how, I guess my story is very, as I slowly grew up, it was, my mom used to write feminist poetry when she was one of the two women at that time in state government in that particular building in nine floors, having 9 stories. And this was quite a long time ago. I'm from a smaller state in India, not very well-known state in India called Orissa. And I'm from the capital of Orissa, actually. And even in the capital at that point, in the 9-story building that she was working, there were only 2 women. So they had no women's toilet at that point. And then asking for a women's toilet became like a huge issue. This is what I say. You can't ask for a thing which seems like, it becomes an issue.
Right.
It becomes a scene. Somebody is making a scene. Why could you have not just keep your silence, without making anyone feel uncomfortable? So I've seen all that happen. Even when I was a kid, I've seen like other women come to my mother, and she has sheltered them from various different types of things that can happen to a woman in the society. So having had visibility to all of this, even then, I was still, when I was growing up, I would still be like, sometimes these thoughts would come to my head like, oh, if only my mom could just not say that right now, or she could just be silent. But I never told her that, thankfully. But when I was an undergraduate, then slowly those are the things I started having a problem with. I started needing to prove myself as a woman in physics. I started being asked question, oh, you want to take physics and maths, all these courses together? Are you sure you can handle that? And that was the first time I started getting all these questions. And luckily, in school, I was in a school where I had a lot of women teachers in physics, and so the only kind of discussion that used to happen was my teachers used to fight over to physics or biology or computers or something. Like, my gender never came into question. However, once you step out of that like protective space, then the gender became a huge question. And so I started realizing how difficult it must have been for my mom to have gone through all this, and at a time when feminism was neither cool nor accepted, not even like a little bit accepted. I remember the first few poems she wrote, her hands were literally like shaking with fear. So later on, that became a very core part of myself. I was able to align all the things that I'd seen growing up with all the things that I was seeing, and then my web way of thinking. I think it was just natural for me to read more and more, understand more and more, and just talk to various different kinds of people. Just try and put yourself in as many kind of experiences as possible, and always try and read the research in various different fields, be it feminism, be it science, be it physics, be it technology. So I think that research mentality has been a common thread through whether I do my paintings or whether I do feminism or whether I do whether I do my physics. And then I've always really loved writing. I used to run a queer feminist magazine for around 4 to 5 years, and I used to run an international remote team, and we had fantastic in-house designers and editors, and they had all handled multiple national campaigns by them, and so there was a lot to learn from them as well, and it was a really good medium of meeting really cool people. And I think I found it really, humbling that, and also really nice that some of the people we actually discovered through our magazine then went on to publish their own books later on in the future. And we basically discovered a lot of activists who were working on the ground, a lot of artists, a lot of resistance walkers. And so over time, I think poetry and writing and just having a very research-focused mentality, I think became very important to me. I'm also very, very passionate about basically using whatever we have, this whole plethora of various different tools in our toolbox, to be used for humanity. Like, that's for the future of humanity. So, and you can't do it unless you're doing it holistically. So whatever I am doing, I'm quite keen to be able to talk about it, not just in a very jargon heavy manner or in a very, very technical manner. But I think if we have all of this information, one of the main problems that we are having right now, we have had a lot of backlash towards expertise over the last many years now. And one of the reasons towards having it, and also one of the ways that we can go forward beyond it, is kind of bridging that gap between expert knowledge and then that knowledge which is not as readily available to the general public. So I think it is part of our responsibility to be able to talk to the general public, because it is public funded money at the end of the day. So we have a responsibility to be able to disseminate that information, and why we are doing that research, and what we have found about that research. And a good government, any kind of government, global governments, national governments, international governments, any kind of government, council level government, is about welfare. And soon it's going to be, what quantum technologies are we going to be using in our council to be able to look at air quality and water quality, So all of these technologies are going to be used for our benefit in the future, and we want to go towards that. And unless we're disseminating that very clearly, then our final target stakeholders, would not be able to use it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about the publicly funded project's responsibility to be able to communicate that to the average person. And
that's why I was trying to stay out of using technical words or jargon. So I might have oversimplified a few things within this podcast, but that was the general idea I was trying to work towards.
Yeah. And I think it's so cool how you're from a very science-focused background. You're doing very intense science, but you're able to also write about that creatively, which was one of the really cool things about the quantum article, was that it was also just a beautiful piece to read. And actually we got a lot of really good feedback. Someone told me at a conference that they felt like they were reading a science fiction novel. They were really transported when they read your piece. Yeah. So
good to hear.
Yeah,
that is what I'm aiming towards. Yes. If we can visualize that future, I think we can go towards it one step at a time. I think it's important to remember that that there is a difference between. So one of the things that we try and do at the National Quantum Computing Center is be mindful of the hype that might be surrounding some of these new technologies, and it's very easy to fall into the trap of hyping up a technology. And I just wanted to kind of address the difference between hype and then writing about it, visualizing about what a technology can be in the future. So what I try to do through my narratives is kind of weave in a story-like format where we are visualizing what our world could be, a human-centered world using all of these technologies which could be human-centered. So I want to make sure that we are kind of thinking that we should make technology for humans rather than trying to force humans to start adopting a technology later on. And as early as we can in this process, get various different kinds of stakeholders to input into how the technology development process should go on, then the better chance we have of developing something that is much more user-friendly. So that's the idea behind trying to get the story out and making it much more, making it set in a context which is accessible and which makes us understand why we are reaching towards the future that we are reaching towards. However, we also want to be very clear that obviously this technology is some of these technology, quantum computing in particular, and its applications, we haven't yet reached a point where we can show you that, we can solve this super complicated problem using a commercial grade quantum computer right now. We cannot. So there are multiple different technical parameters that various different organizations are using to measure where we are in terms of that technology development, where we are in terms of algorithm development. And so we will be continuing to do that. We will be publishing evidence. We are holding workshops, we are holding roundtables, and we will be pushing out as much information as we can, peer-reviewed as well as other types of white papers and insight papers and so on. And we work very closely with regulators and policymakers as well. So I led a stream of work at the NQCC where we engage with the DRCF and its member regulatory bodies like the FCA, the ICO, Ofcom, and so on in the UK, where we engaged with their quantum technology horizon programs. They each already had a horizon program. So we did a teach-in session where we taught various different kinds of quantum technologies to raise the awareness of those technologies within the regulators. And then we had a reverse teach-in session, where the regulators helped us understand their remits and the kind of problems that they face with new technologies. And obviously with the ethical challenges that AI is facing right now, the public discourse around AI safety, AI ethics, responsible innovation, that's really important for us to be following. And we are following that discourse and we are learning from it. And we are already at the NQCC, we have full-time officers looking at responsible research and innovation frameworks for quantum computing. And so at the end of that regulatory stream of work that we have done, we then kind of had a symposium where we had a lot of free discussion with the regulators and policymakers. And so we're trying to be very proactive in bringing in various different stakeholders very early on, so that regulation is pro-innovation, but also we're keeping in mind the potential fallouts of properly not regulating some of these technologies as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a great point about being realistic about what the technology can do and responsible in how it's being developed, and what you mentioned about not just like hyping it up because it's something that's like cool and futuristic. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Quantum technology is like, it sounds like a big and scary topic, but you managed to make it approachable. And I really appreciate your perspective on the human side of development, and focus on how to communicate things in an approachable way.
Thank you very much. It was really lovely to be on the podcast.
Thank you.